All right, I want to continue on now with this Death of God passage from the Gay Science 125. So Nietzsche continues. All right, so he just, the madman had given all these metaphors, said all this stuff to these people. Here the madman was silent and looked again at his hearers. They also were silent and looked at him in surprise. At last, he threw his lantern on the ground so that it broke in pieces and was extinguished. I come too early, he then said. My time is not yet. This prodigious event, that is the death of God, is still on its way and is traveling. It has not yet reached men's ears. Lightning and thunder need time. The light of the stars needs time. Deeds need time, even after they are done, to be seen and heard. This deed, right, the killing of God, the death of God, is as yet further from them than the furthest star. And yet they have done it. Right? So there's a kind of recognition here in the madman that these people don't realize what he's talking about. So I want to focus on this. I want to focus on a couple of aspects about the death of God, and try to figure out what exactly Nietzsche might be getting at. And so the first aspect, the two aspects I'm going to focus on are first, this idea that we did it, or, as he says at the end there, and yet they have done it. It's not it's not them as opposed to him. Us human beings have done this. We killed God. How so? What does that mean? Or what? That's the first thing I'm going to focus on. The second thing I want to focus on is this kind of strange idea, and it's really what most of this passage that we're looking at now is concerned with, that this prodigious event is still on its way, that he's come too early. The time's not yet. So what does that mean? What's he getting at? All right, so first, how on earth did we kill God? Now, if this were a literal thing, right? If this claim were literal, yeah, it'd be really hard to see how this, if God is this omnipotent, immaterial, eternal being, how could you possibly kill God, right? So he doesn't mean it literally. Doesn't mean we literally killed God. So what does he mean then? Well, what is going to mean is that we have rendered belief in God less crucial to human lives. We have displaced God from the center of our own lives, right? That's what it is to kill God. It's to, God used to be central to people's lives. That's God's being alive. And we have now displaced God. We've removed God from the center of our lives. When we live our lives now, we make the major choices that we make. Right? This is picking up on that first sentence from the previous video. God's no longer really there. It's just, being comfortable and respected and making some money and whatever, right? Well, how did that happen? What affected that? What made that happen? Nietzsche's idea that he expresses in various places is that we killed God, so to speak, through advances in scientific understanding. And this idea is not particularly it's not particularly novel with Nietzsche, and it's not particularly unheard of today, right? It's a fairly widespread claim that you'll find out there that, look, the idea is something like this, right? For the longest time, people used to think that the world was kind of infused with this divine spark. After all of this stuff the natural world kind of came from God and was directed back to God. And so the idea was the world, the natural world, reality was kind of what's the world, enchanted, this is the way some people put it, right? Is kind of infused with divinity just below the surface. Yeah, that's just a frog jumping around, but you look below the surface and you'll see all this, right? You understand the frog as this creature of God, or going back to right? The divine spark that's animating everything, the source of everything. Well, this idea, Nietzsche's idea here is, well, look, we got really good at science. And so then what we did, essentially, in getting really good at science, is we kind of, yeah, fine, there are frogs there, but then we kind of looked behind the veil of nature. We really probed into how frogs work, or how whatever, right? Not just frogs, but everything, right? And we got really good at science. And when we looked behind, when we dug down, we didn't find a divine spark. We didn't find the handiwork of God. We just found atoms colliding and forces. And that's it. There's no divinity there. It's just forces and stuff. I don't know, just stuff. And so these advances in scientific understanding have kind of, this is Nietzsche's idea, right? Have rendered belief in God kind of untenable. He's just not there. God's not there, right? Not back behind. And so Nietzsche's got this idea, and he never explains it at terribly great length, but that the advances in science have made belief in God untenable, kind of incredible in the kind of original sense of the word. Not like amazing, but like I can't believe in God. Credible is the credo is the Latin word for belief. That's where the word incredible, something that you couldn't believe, right? That's Nietzsche's idea. So that's how we kill God, according to Nietzsche, through science. Thanks, science. Second, this prodigious event is still on its way. What does that mean? I think the key to understanding this idea is going to be to understand one of the other passages that we read from the Gay Science, section 108. This is one of the only other passages within Nietzsche's corpus within which you can find this phrase, God is dead. And so what does passage 108 say? So I think passage 108 is going to shed light on this idea, what he means by this prodigious event being on its way. So Nietzsche says, after Buddha was dead, people showed his shadow for centuries afterwards in a cave, an immense, frightful shadow. God is dead. But as the human race is constituted, there will perhaps be caves for millennia yet, in which people will show his shadow. And we have still to overcome his shadow. And so the idea here, I take it, what Nietzsche is getting at is that God is dead, but people don't fully realize that. And in particular, they don't realize the implications of that. Nietzsche's view is that with the death of God, all of those beliefs, ideas that flowed from or were founded on God have also become suspect, are liable to collapse, are liable to become unbelievable, in the same way that belief in God is now really kind of, according to Nietzsche, unbelievable. These shadows that he's talking about here in 108 are those other beliefs that kind of flowed from or were justified by, were at home in this system of thought, this worldview that revolved around belief in God. So, belief in God, this general worldview, led to certain other beliefs, led to certain other ideas. Those other ideas are these shadows. Those other values are these shadows. So, what he's talking about here in this passage, these ideas and values that were at home in, originated in, and were justified by God or this system of belief involving God, people continue to believe in them, even though they've kind of essentially given up belief in God. Even though God's no longer central to their lives and how they think about themselves and how they live, nonetheless, they still subscribe to certain ideas and values that only make sense if God exists. Right? Something like that is the idea. And so people continue to believe in these things even though God has died. These ideas and values that people continue to believe in, continue to think are true, even though God has died, belief in God is untenable. These ideas and values are these shadows. And what people don't realize, the reason this prodigious event is still on its way, people don't realize that with this kind of discarding of God from this so focal point in our lives, right? With this displacing of God. God is no longer central to how we think about and live our lives. With the advent of the death of God in that sense, it no longer makes any sense to subscribe to these ideas and values that are justified only by reference to God. Yet people do. That's the sense in which the event is still on its way. People don't really fully realize the implications of the death of God. Now, this is still rather abstract. Well, what are these ideas and values? I mean, does this really make any sense? Here's where Nietzsche starts getting really, in my view at least, really interesting. One of those shadows is morality. The prodigious event is still on its way. People don't realize that morality's got to go out the window now, too. That's Nietzsche's idea. That's what he's claiming. One of the shadows cast by God that people continue to cling on to, even though God has died, even though they don't, when you look at how they live their lives, God isn't central to it or anything like that, right? One of the shadows that people continue to cling to is morality itself. What we're going to turn to now is Nietzsche's treatment of morality. This comes in what's perhaps his greatest work, The Genealogy of Morality. So to understand the sense in which morality is a shadow, to understand how morality is related to God, we need to read Nietzsche's genealogy. That's what Nietzsche addresses in the genealogy. And then he also addresses what should we do in light of all of this? Given the death of God, given that morality is a shadow of God, what are we to do? Where do we go from here? That's what we're going to see Nietzsche try to address in the genealogy.